Hello, third graders. Welcome back to our classifying animals lesson. So yesterday we learned all about arthropods and that these are animals that are invertebrates, meaning that they do not have a backbone. Remember, in means not, and vertebrate are backbones, those little bones that make it up. So an invertebrate is an animal without a backbone. And we talked about the groups of arthropods. There was the 4 groups. We talked about insects, which were the largest group. We talked about arachnids. Remember, those are spiders and scorpions. We did crustaceans, which were those crabs, lobsters, shrimp. And we did the meropods, which were centipedes and millipedes. And all of those animals had exoskeletons. And remember, exoskeletons were that outer covering that protects the internal body. It's kind of like an armor, a shield of armor on the outside. Well, today we're going to talk about some invertebrates that do not have that exoskeleton or that outer armor, and what groups make up this group of invertebrates without exoskeletons and how they are surviving. So here are some pictures of invertebrates without an exoskeleton for some. We have specific groups. We have jellyfish, we have a worm. This kind of looks like, I'm not really sure. We'll find out. We have a snail here. So let's go ahead and read a little bit more. So grab your classifying animals book, and you're going to open to the very last 2 pages, page 67 and 68 in that book. And it's going to say invertebrates without exoskeletons at the top. So follow along in your book with me. You can make notes in your book or write or highlight in your book as we go. Invertebrates without exoskeletons. Some invertebrates do not have any skeleton or exoskeleton at all. They use fluid, that's like liquid, in their bodies to keep their shape and move around. So they use liquid or fluid in their bodies to keep it from being a big blob on the ground. The first group we're going to talk about are called the mollusks. Here is the word mollusks. Here are some examples of mollusks, and let's read about this group. Mollusks are a group of invertebrates with soft bodies and a large muscular foot. Some types of mollusks, like octopus, squid, and slugs, are protected by a tough bag of skin called the mantle. So here's a slug right here, and you can see this tough bag, a lot of us think it's hard, but it's a bag, is its mantle. And here is its large muscular foot. In some kinds of mollusks, like clams, oysters, and snails, the mantle releases a liquid material that hardens into a shell. The shell gives the mollusk a place to hide. The shell also keeps the creature from drying out. So if you've ever seen a clam or an oyster, or even a snail, this could be a snail instead of a slug, I'm sorry, they have a shell. Now, let's look back at the picture. So here is a slug. I'm sorry, that was wrong before. The other one was a snail. Here's a slug who has this bag. This would be a squid. Here's the bag here. And an octopus, same thing up here. Its head is kind of like its bag. Here are examples of a clam and an oyster and snails. So these are some examples of where that bag has hardened into an outer shell. The next group of invertebrates without exoskeletons we're going to talk about are worms. So here's some different kinds of worms. This is the worm you probably see most often, but there's other kinds of worms. Worms are another group of invertebrates. Worms have long, thin bodies with no legs. These are not like the meropods, the centipedes and millipedes. that have legs. Worms have no legs. Worms may live in soil, in the water, or inside other larger animals. Some worms are microscopic, meaning they're so teeny tiny you need a microscope to see them. The African giant earthworm can grow to 22 feet long. One kind of ocean worm is nearly 200 feet long. Oh my goodness. Some examples of worms are tapeworms, leeches, and earthworms. The next group that we're going to talk about are the sponges. And yes, our sponges that we use in our home come from real live animals called a sponge that live in the ocean. And if you've ever taken a trip up to our northern parts, you can actually go to the sponge docks and go out with a diver who will dive down and bring up live sponge for you to look at. Sponges are some of the world's simplest animals. They live most of their lives stuck in one spot underwater. Sponges have no heads, eyes, tails, or mouth. They have no muscles, no nerves, or even no organs. Their bodies are covered with tiny holes. You can even see these tiny little holes here called pores. Sponges feed by pumping water through their pores and filtering out small particles of food. So there's little teeny tiny holes called pores and the water goes through it. And as the water goes through it, the sponge pulls out the little teeny microscopic pieces of food that are floating in the water. The next group of animals are called the ECHINODERMS. And these are going to be like our starfish and sea dollars and sea urchins, all of these things. Sea stars, sea urchins, so here's a sea star, sea urchin, and sand dollars and sea cucumbers belong to a group called ECHINODERMS. ECHINODERMS mean spiny skin. The invertebrates in this group all have some type of spines or bumps on the outside of their bodies. They have a shell covered by skin. All ECHINODERMS have radial symmetry on their bodies. So here's a new word for you guys, radial symmetry. This means that you could go around in a circle to cut their bodies into 5 identical pieces. So if I went like this and cut it into 5, they would all be the same. Same thing for sea stars and sea urchins, sand dollars, they're all the same. ECHINODERMS also have tube feet that attach to an object to help it move. Their tube feet are also used for feeding. So let's go back here. This is a sea star turned over, so you can see a sea star here. You can kind of see the little tube feet, but if you've ever flipped over the bottom of a sea star, you'll see those little tubed feet that they use for feeding and for moving along. The next group that we're going to read about is called the CNIDARIANS. And yes, I know it starts with a C. It's a silent letter. CNIDARIANS. These are going to be our jellyfish, corals, sea anemones. Jellyfish, fish, corals, and sea anemones belong to a group called the CNIDARIANS. Sorry, I always want to say that wrong. CNIDARIANS, which means stinging cells. Oh, stinging cells. No, thank you. Jellyfish are ocean animals with soft, transparent, which means you can see through it, bodies, and long tentacles. Those are those tentacles over here, these red ones, and the yellow ones, with thousands of microscopic stinging cells. Jellyfish move by contracting their bodies, but they don't have much control over where they go. So they bring their body together, like if you were going to hunch over, and then they stretch out and then bring it back together and hunch out. But they don't have any way to like they don't have a motor on them to tell them to go left or right. They just kind of go wherever. Most of the time, they drift with the water current, which is just the way the water is moving. Sea anemones over here have a slender body shaped like a tube with short tentacles surrounding their mouth at the top, right there. They, however, stay anchored to rocks or dig their soft bodies into the sand on the seafloor and catch prey with their venomous tentacles. So they, unlike jellyfish, stay in one spot, but they also have those stinging tentacles. Here are some other pictures here of the cnidarians. These are going to be your coral. A lot of people didn't realize that coral is also an animal, and it is. Same thing like a sea anemone. It stays in one place. You're going to be watching this video about different animals that belong in this category in a little bit.